Thanks for being here. This bottle of Femme on my tray is not technically the Femme that Edmond Roudnitska composed in occupied Paris around 1943-44. This is the 1989 Olivia Cresp reformulation, which is what most people who think they own a Roudnitska actually own. In this fragrance, the civet is softened. The cumin is massively amplified. The plum carried further. The bottle on my tray is, in fact, the daughter of the bottle that Roudnitska made. And when I tell you I've lived inside Roudnitska for years, what I actually mean is that I've lived inside what the industry decided his work was allowed to become. Every Roudnitska bottle you've ever smelled is a reformulation. 6 bottles you would recognize. 2 books of aesthetic philosophy nobody opens. 1 studio at the top of a hill above grass where his wife worked beside him for 50 years and his son works there now. This is the man and the family that invented modern perfumery. The credit conventions have never caught up. Let me try. His name was Edmond Roudnitska, and to call him a perfumer is correct in the way calling Le Corbusier a draftsman is correct. He was born in Nice, 1905, and died in Cabris in 1996. In between, he composed maybe 18 perfumes the world saw and 2 books of aesthetic philosophy perfumers still pretend they've read and mostly have not. He took the Rochas commission for Femme in 1943 while occupied Paris was starving. In 1947, he walked out and he bought a villa above grass called Sainte Blanche and opened his own studio, Arte Parfum. He never went back to the corporate lab. He composed at home and he grew his own gardens of the materials he was composing with, so he could smell the lily of the valley in the morning and the rose in the afternoon. There were 3 people in the room when the great Roudnitska compositions were made. Edmond, Thérèse, Michel, and, of course, the garden. Most perfumery today is made in a basement lab in Geneva by a junior whose principal training is a chromatograph and a brief from the marketing department that's never met the customer. When you walk through any sales floor in 2026 and find yourself looking at 50 bottles and not wanting to wear any of them, that's what you're smelling. The absence of Cabris. I said 3 people in the room. I want to talk about the second one. Thérèse Roudnitska was a perfumer. That's the sentence the trade has been quietly leaving out for 60 years, and that is the sentence this episode is going to put back in. She was Edmond's wife, and they met in Paris in 1942, and the early years of their relationship were spent walking the woods, gathering muguet together. She was also the principal evaluator at Arte Parfum, from its founding to the end of his composing life. The trials came to her bench. The proportions were weighed at her nose. The chord that was wrong became a chord that was wrong because she said so. And to call her a muse is to do what the trade does to female collaborators across every artistic medium of the 20th century. It's to take a working partner and turn her into a piece of furniture in a man's biography. she was not a piece of furniture. She was the second nose in the room and frequently the first one to tell him a composition was finished. The clearest evidence of her authorship is Diorissimo. The trade version goes something like this. Christian Dior loved Muguet, commissioned a bottle from the perfumer he trusted the most. Edmond composed it. That was not wrong as far as it goes. It's just not the whole composition history. Edmond didn't start from a blank brief. He started from a flower he'd been walking through with Thérèse for more than a decade. When the commission arrived, the trials were composed at Sainte Blanche in front of a Muguet bed Edmond planted for her. Michel Roudnitska, 8 years old when Diorissimo launched, has gone on record about the numerous trials done in front of that garden bed. The trials were evaluated at Thérèse's nose. The Diorissimo the world has been smelling since 1956 is the Diorissimo Thérèse let out of the studio. She is, by any honest accounting, a co-creator of Diorissimo. The standard credit line naming Edmond alone is a convention the perfume world has been too lazy to revise. Her hand is widely traced in the broader catalogue too. The major Roudnitska compositions from 1947 onward were composed inside a working partnership of two noses, and the work of the second nose has been systematically undercredited. The undercredit was not an oversight. It was the price of being the wife. Edmond wrote 2 books, and the most important, Le Parfum, published in 1980 by Presse Universitaire de France, 128 pages that contain no formulas, no shortcuts, no anecdotes about famous customers. It contains an aesthetic theory of olfaction, and it argues that perfume is an art form on equal footing with music, painting, and poetry. In fact, the whole industry would do better if it had read this book once. 3 of his theses, the 3 I can demonstrate on bottles you will recognize. First, perfumery is constructive, not extractive. What's in the bottle is the perfumer's argument about what something smells like, composed out of the materials coaxed into pretending. This is the thesis I love the most. Diorissimo contains no Muguet. Beautiful, isn't it? Second, the discipline of reduction. A great perfume contains the minimum number of materials necessary to articulate its idea. This is the thesis contemporary niche perfumery has most spectacularly abandoned. Count the notes on any niche launch. Not one of them is justifying its placement. Third, the defense of synthetics. Synthetic molecules are part of the aesthetic palette. He had no patience for the natural-only romanticism that infects perfumery discourse today. The materials are the painter's pigments. Some grew on a tree, some came out of a reactor at Firmenich. The question is what you do with them. Now to the bottles, where these 3 theses are wearing fabric. Femme is the bottle to begin with, because Femme is the wartime bottle. Marcel Rochas commissioned it as a gift for the woman who would become Madame Rochas, Hélène. Edmond composed it inside an occupied country, in a register nobody was asking for. Prune absolu, cumin, civet, oak moss, patchouli, the note pyramid of a perfume composed during a famine is dense and sweet the way overripe fruit is sweet, with a rot at the edge, which is what makes it adult, I guess. It does not smell like a perfume composed for the sales floor. It smells like a perfume composed for one woman in one room while bombs are falling somewhere. That is what perfume was supposed to be. A French maison commission was not a product. It was a portrait. The brief was a person. The instruction was, make me her, and let nobody smell like her. The Femme I own is the Cresp bottle, and it is still extraordinary. And it's still recognizably the same animal. The cumin is the first thing my husband notices when I wear it. And it's also the first thing he asks me to consider not wearing when we're going to dinner with people who do not know us. The plum, when it dries down, smells like the third hour of an afternoon nap in someone's grandmother's house. The civet, which is no longer real civet, it's civetone, is still doing the work of telling you there is a body inside the perfume. Most contemporary perfumery is composed so there's no body. The wearer of the perfume is implied as a clean, hairless, deodorized, unindividuated user of said product. Femme says, a woman has been here. The Cresp Femme says, a woman has been here with notes from her lawyer. Both are adult statements and both are rarer than they ought to be. Diorama, 1949, was Roudnitska's first commission from Christian Dior. It's a fruity, floral chypre, melon, peach, plum, jasmine, oak moss. The bottle I own is a reformulation because Diorama was discontinued and quietly reissued and quietly altered. And the version a collector can still find smells like the second cousin of the Diorama in the books. It's still wonderful. It's the one bottle I own that almost nobody knows. It's the bottle I reach for when I want to smell like a woman who used to know how to be photographed. Diorissimo 1956 is the Lily of the Valley masterpiece that contains no lily of the valley. The flower yields nothing and it cannot be extracted. To compose Diorissimo, Roudnitska Studio built Lily of the Valley out of hydroxycitronellal. It's a synthetic with a muguet character the flower itself cannot be made to yield, plus salicylates and rosewood and a small confession of jasmine. The result is the smell of a flower whose smell cannot be smelled outside the flower. It's the closest that perfumery has come to making a vermeer. This is the construction thesis made audible. It's also Thérèse's perfume in the strongest possible sense. The project was rooted in her. Edmond built it with her. Diorissimo is a co-authored bottle wearing a sole credit label. I've corrected it in this episode, and the rest of the trade, I guess, can catch up at its leisure. If you only have time to understand one moment in modern perfumery, here it is. Hedione, used at an unprecedented concentration in a citrus EDT sold to men. The year was 1966, and the fragrance was Eau Sauvage. The man who put the Hedione in was Edmond Roudnitska, with Thérèse as the second nose. The man who supplied the molecule from Firmenich was Edouard de Mol. Between them, they reorganized what perfumery was allowed to be. Hedione is a synthetic jasmonate that barely smells of anything on its own, and yet does the most extraordinary thing in a composition. It transmits, it pulls jasmine into the air like sunlight on a petal at 10 in the morning. Before 1996, perfumery worked in the chord and shadow logic of 19th century absolutes. After 1966, perfumery could be luminous, transparent, air bright, the whole light, airy, modern vocabulary of the next 60 years descends from Eau Sauvage, CK1, L'Odyssée, Hermès, every Jean-Claude Ellena composition, all downstream. This is the defense of synthetics thesis at architectural scale. A Firmenich molecule lifting an entire genre into the next century against the natural-only romantics who could not see what he was doing. The current Eau Sauvage is not the 1966 formula, but the architecture is still legible. Spray it on the inside of your wrist and wait 3 minutes, and what comes off the skin is the smell of a Mediterranean morning in a city that no longer exists, transmitted by a synthetic molecule that did not exist before Roudnitska decided to risk it. The molecule was new enough that the trade was wary of it. Edmond put it in anyway. The law says Cary Grant wore Eau Sauvage. The law says Yves Saint Laurent wore it. Half the women I admired in the 1980s wore it because the men they loved, and that they wanted had worn it. 6 years after Eau Sauvage, the studio did it again with Diorella in 1972. It was the green chypre answer to the bright citrus question Eau Sauvage had asked. Melon, basil, honeysuckle, jasmine, vetiver, oak moss. The Hedione carries through, but the temperature is lower. The light is greener, the body slightly more present. Diorella is what you wear when you want to be in the garden at the back of the house and not particularly visible. Diorella is the bottle that taught me the gender of the perfume is a marketing decision, and the wearer is the only person whose taste it has to honor. He composed a perfume for Thérèse and never released it during his lifetime, and she wore it and nobody else did. After his death in 96, Michel made the formula available, and in 2000, Frédéric Malle released it commercially as Le Parfum de Thérèse. It has plum, jasmine, leather, vetiver, and the same Roudnitska civet that nobody else knew how to handle. The bottle is widely sold as a love story, which it is. The other version, however, is the working partnership version. A man composed a private bottle for the woman who had been co-authoring his catalogue for 50 years and could not, in the conventions of the trade, be credited for any of it. The private bottle was the only place the credit would fit. He put her name on it. He gave it to her. The rest of the catalogue, by my count, also bears her name, and the trade simply doesn't know how to read it. I don't own a bottle of Les Parfums de Thérèse. I should. I'm going to. There are two living inheritors of the Cabri bench. The first is the apprenticeship. Edmond trained Pierre Bourdon at Art et Parfum, which is the most important fact in late 20th century perfumery that nobody outside the industry knows. Bourdon arrived at Cabri in 1970 and walked out with the most legible Roudnitska inheritance of his generation. The lineage is direct, bench to bench. And what he did was take the discipline of reduction and the willingness to use a synthetic at architectural scale. The conviction that a perfume is composed, not assembled. His cool water for Davidoff in 1988 is the dihydrojasmonate corollary to Edmond's Hedione in Eau Sauvage. One molecule used at a concentration no one had risked before restructures the genre. Cool water is the masculine fougère of the 1990s in the same way that Eau Sauvage was the masculine citrus of the 1960s. Think about it. Without Cabri, there's no cool water. Without cool water, there is no 1990s masculine perfumery, which means without Cabri, my husband does not smell like the man I married, which is the most personal consequence of an aesthetic decision made by a man my husband never met. Bourdon's Iris Poudre, composed for Frédéric Malle in 2000, is the Roudnitska inheritance in its most explicit form. On skin. Aha. When I wear it, the iris arrives clean and high, and the violet is half a step behind. The carnation underneath does the work of telling me this is an adult floral. It is not a girl floral. And the dry down is the soft powdered musk that the trade calls soft because it cannot bring itself to call powder powder. I've reached for it on mornings when I wanted the discipline of Bourdon's practice on my wrist and nothing else around it. And quite frankly, the iris arrives in this fragrance the way that Roudnitska would have signed it. And that is the inheritance. The apprentice got his powdered iris a decade after the market got the reformulated Femme. Edmond, wherever he is laughing. The other inheritance in the room is Michel Roudnitska, Edmond and Thérèse's son. He became a perfumer himself, took over Art et Parfum at his father's 1996 death, and he still composes there in the same villa at the same bench. The room hasn't stopped working in 80 years, which is more than can be said for most institutions of any kind. He composed the heart of the parfums, or should I say, most of the Parfums DelRae lineup for the San Francisco niche house in the early 2000s. And he also did the very important work of releasing the formula for Les Parfums de Thérèse to Frédéric Malle in 2000. He also gave us his father's room, right? It's still open. He's still practicing in it. And he composed his own catalogue inside the inherited aesthetic without imitating it. Roudnitska didn't train Jean-Claude Ellena, Olivia Giacobetti, or Christine Nagel directly. None of them was at Cabri. But they've all built careers downstream of the line Roudnitska drew in 1966 and theorized in 1980. You know, Ellena has named Roudnitska as his most important influence on his composition. The entire transparent, minimalist Hermès register he built in the 2000s is in conscious dialogue with thesis 4 and 5, the reduction discipline and the construction thesis. Giacobetti's reduction discipline at L'Artisan Parfumer, and Nagel, who succeeded Ellena at Hermès as in-house perfumer, is carrying the register forward. The whole pared-back school of the 2000s and 2010s operates in a vocabulary Roudnitska wrote. And half of them know it, and half of them do not. And the half that do not know this are the half whose work is going to age poorly. But the lineage is four-stranded. Edmond composed at Cabri. Thérèse evaluated and co-authored. Bourdon trained at Cabri and walked out carrying the architecture of reduction into Davidoff, into Malle. Michel inherited the room and is still composing in it. The room is the center of the story. The Femme on my dressing table is not the Femme he made. The current Eau Sauvage is not the Eau Sauvage he made. Diorella is not the Diorella he made. None of them could be again. But the daughter bottles carry his argument forward, and the argument was always that a perfume can be the equal of anything else a serious artist has made in the 20th century if a serious artist composes it. He composed them, and Thérèse composed alongside him. Michel, their son, inherited the room and is still composing in it. The industry has been arguing with all three of them ever since, and arguing badly, because the industry has not yet learned to count past one. I've decided to side with the Roudnitskas, plural.